Good afternoon, everyone. Today is April 15th, 2020. I'm your host, Ruzara from Zara Associate Marketing Group. With me today are our partners, Mr. Gennady Krivoy, and we have Manjeet Gill, and we also have a special guest with us today. Given the current pandemic, we have committed to bringing a variety of different expert panels as our weekly guests on the show. Today's topic is commercial real estate, and it relates to all the small business owners and many of our current and past clients. If you're a small business owner, whether you own a restaurant, coffee shop, gym, fitness operator, retail, wholesaler, whatever the case might be, this episode is one that you definitely want to pay attention to. If you happen to get some value out of this, which we hope you do, because that was our intention of creating this in the first place, we would love you to share this with your friends and family, and so they get an opportunity to watch it as well. Our special guest today is a certified commercial investment member. He's a business owner. He's a John Maxwell certified coach and trainer. He's our partner and our very good friend, Mr. Ray Yenkana. Welcome, Mr. Ray.
Thank you, Ruz. Pleasure is mine. How can I help?
We appreciate you getting on this call with us. And we just wanted to know, as a commercial real estate expert, what's been the biggest impact that you've seen in the last few months, or actually in the last month since this pandemic has really taken place?
Well, the biggest impact is when you have small businesses who's been asked to either close their doors or downsize their business to, if it's a restaurant, just a takeout. And in some cases, businesses have had to completely board up their business. And so if those tenants are not getting income, but they're still obligated to pay their rent, some of them will be able to do it and some of them won't be able to do it. So the biggest problem is the tenants having income issues, which from their income, they pay their rent. From the landlord's point of view, when something like this happens, most landlords will have a mortgage, and the mortgage is paid by the rents that come in, or a portion of the rents that come in. So both those parties, if you cut off the money coming in from the public and from their customers of the tenant, it affects everybody up the line. It affects the tenants who renting these commercial properties, and affects the landlords who are expecting those monies to pay their mortgage payments.
So very, very difficult times. There's a lot of tenants and business owners that business been shut down indefinitely without any further notice, especially the ones that are not considered, what's the word that I'm looking for?
Essential service.
Essential services. And a lot of these people don't know if they're gonna basically open back up or when they're gonna open back up. So aside from these challenges that you're seeing, what are some other problems that you see in the field right now?
Well, first of all, even if you say to a company, a business, that they're an essential service, they're an essential service, but they now have to operate with the COVID-19 rules. So they may be an essential service and they may be able to still operate out of their facility, but everything has changed the way they're operating because they have to follow all of the protocol of making sure they don't cause anybody to be infected or to receive any kind of infection. So they have to do physical distancing, and they have to wear protective mechanisms on their face and hands, and they have to have a limited amount of people in their facility. Mm-hmm. So that just slows, even if they're an essential service. I mean, Costco might be considered an essential service, but guess what? There's no way their sales will be the same in this season as it would be normally, because you have to line up to get in. There are only so many people allowed in the store. So, I mean, one of my neighbors went to Costco yesterday and went at about 9 in the morning, never came home until about 11:30.
Wow.
So understand that the problems aren't solved for some people who are in essential service. It affects them too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Any business, any essential business service, their people won't be able to come and work as normal.
Unprecedented times. I know Manjeet had some questions regarding the government policies. I'll let her ask that question. Manjeet, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. So Ray, maybe you can touch on this. What are some of the government proposed pending policies that may help in these challenges at this time?
Well, the biggest thing that the government's put out there that will that would be a benefit to help any business owner, which would be both the tenants and the landlords, is the $40,000 loan that the government's giving. They're giving it interest-free, and it right from the beginning, they're saying you don't have to pay back the whole $40,000. You only have to pay back 30, with a little bit of an innuendo that possibly you might not even be as high as 30. So even if it was only borrow 40, keep it for, what do we say, year and a half, keep it for a year and keep it till the end of 2021 and pay us back 30, and we don't charge you any interest. Everybody that qualifies. So I think there's a few qualifications. The biggest one has to do with your company paying out a minimum of $40,000 in wages last year and a maximum, I think, of $1 million in wages. But if you qualify for that, you better grab that money. That is probably the best help that the government's put out there for a business, for a commercial, either tenant or landlord that has a limited company that qualifies. Easy to find that information on the COVID-19 web information from the government.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And where do you see the commercial real estate the market going in the next few months, even with our own offices, our residential transactions, they have been impacted. Do you think the commercial side will be impacted as well?
The commercial side will definitely be impacted, and from a number of different ways. There isn't one specific way, but I can tell you that when a major company like a major store, and I know of some major stores that are all across Western Canada, they have sent a memo to their landlords telling them they won't be paying rent for the next 6 months, and they will add that rent on to the end of their lease. So it's not like the landlord will recuperate parts of those 6 months after this 6 months is over. No, they have to wait till the lease ends and then they'll get the money. When things like that are happening, when other landlords are allowing their tenants to defer some of their rents, or in some cases maybe even forgive, they're saying, well, okay, I get it, I'm not going to charge you rent. What's going to happen is you got to realize that probably one of the biggest things that affects everybody is stress. So this whole situation we're in is very stressful, and it will affect many people differently. And so in terms of the commercial market usually follows the residential market. When the residential market is down, the commercial market is up. Well, there's no signs that the residential market is going down. Just the number of sales are down, mm-hmm. But there's no sign of the market itself being weakened or prices being weakened. And there's not much chance of that happening anyway because of supply and demand. There's lots of residential supply. So the residential market isn't going to weaken, but the commercial market, there will be opportunities. There will be lots of opportunities that will come, except they don't look like opportunities, they look like problems. Mm-hmm. But for the people who lie in wait, who have money in reserve, who will look for opportunities, these people will see the opportunities, other people won't. And there'll be some really good opportunities to buy and acquire different types of commercial properties, strip malls, apartment buildings, office buildings, small, large. They're just going to look like a lot of problems, and whoever's willing to jump in and solve the problems and have somebody like Ruse to help them solve the problems, or Gennady or Manjeet, they'll come out 2-3 years down the road saying it looked like a bad time for everybody, but I was able to acquire this property during that time.
That's right. You come out on top in the end.
Yes.
My other question is, how much have these recent changes affected the lending practices of bigger banks or smaller banks, such as a Business Development Bank of Canada?
So the bigger banks, and you mentioned the development bank. So the development bank, I was on a call with the development bank and some people this morning, And the development bank is being very aggressive. They want to, well, they want to be aggressive in terms of making sure that their existing customers make it. So basically, they're basically taking away the principal payment. They are trying to get everybody on an interest-only payment. They are reducing the interest rate so the payment's low, and they're going to get the principal paid back by adding more principal on, but maybe 2-3 years down the road, so that they get their principal back. But at that time, maybe they've helped the people survive and get themselves in a position that they can afford it down the road. And I think, quite frankly, all the major banks are doing that to some degree or another. So if you go talk to your bank, I've talked to probably 4 or 5 of the major banks in the last week. And the reason I was talking to them was because I also was in the process of talking to my landlord about deferring my rent. And I wanted to make sure that he would go along with it. And the typical comeback from the landlord usually is going to be, well, I got a mortgage payment. Well, as soon as they said that, I said, I already checked with your bank. Mm-hmm. I called your bank and I checked with them. Yeah, I know you got a mortgage payment, but the bank is going to reduce your payment, so you're only paying interest.
That's right.
So I want to reduce my rent, so I'm only paying you a portion of the rent because I have to keep my staff. I want to keep the building open. I want to keep all the equipment there. We're still working. It's just that we have to work under stringent conditions, and the number of sales are down. So we got to survive, help us survive, and you got to survive, I understand, and the banks will help you survive.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
So Ray, that brings up a really good point. I mean, just between the 4 of us on this call today, I think all of us have commercial tenancy obligations on certain places that we're renting. At the same time, you know, I know with Manjeet, yourself, me, and Gennadi's family, we also own some commercial spots that we have tenants in. So we get to see both sides of this from a tenant's point of view and as well as from the landlord's point of view. And it's affecting both parties. I mean, one of the attitudes that most of the tenants are taking is, oh, well, I'm not making money, I'm not going to pay. So there's always 2 sides to it. I know Gennady had some questions related to your suggestions on how to deal with these problems, whether you're a tenant or whether you're a landlord. I'll let Gennady ask you that question himself.
Right. So yeah, on that point, having clients, both tenants and landlords, you know, everyone feels like it's their own personal problem, and sometimes they forget that everyone's in it together. So we've talked about sort of the big picture stuff. So I just want to focus on practical conversations between landlords and tenants. So what would you say specifically to landlords and tenants? How do you guys fix this? How do you guys work it out?
So let's, I can address either one, but I'll start with the landlords. So landlords make their living and make their investments work by having tenants that pay the rent. So when the marketplace interrupts the tenant's income, so the tenants can't pay the rent or can't pay the full rent, it puts the landlord in a squeeze, and because now he still has a mortgage payment. But in our previous question, we talked about the fact that there's hardly a landlord anywhere that's not going to get some relief from his bank, so his payment doesn't have to be the payment that he normally makes. So if he's able to get an interest-only payment.
Is that a fact, Ray? Is that a fact that every single bank is working with the landlords in terms of some sort of relief, whether it's interest payment only or reduction or deferral? Is that a fact where every bank?
Well, I can only, you know, I haven't been able to speak to every bank, but I've definitely spoken to the majority of the major banks. I've definitely spoken to the majority of the major banks, and I haven't heard from any of the bankers. As a matter of fact, I had one banker say to me, Ray, we are all doing this. So one major bank said, we are all doing it. They talk among themselves. Mm-hmm. So I'm not the person to say all the banks are doing it and all the lenders are doing it, but for sure it's being done by many of the major lenders. that they don't want to see a defaulted mortgage. So they're gonna, and this is a unique situation. When last was the country in a pandemic? When last did this is not because anybody's being malicious or being mean or trying to be an idiot. This is just the tenants are lost their income, a lot of it, some of it, or all of it. Now they're not able to pay all or any of their rent of their rental payment to the landlord. The banks are saying to the landlord, "Hey, we'll work with you." The landlord should adopt the attitude of, "I'm going to work with the tenants and try and figure this out." That should be the attitude. The attitude should be one of cooperation, work together. I mean, no landlord wants to lose his tenants. Unfortunately, some of them will. Some of the tenants won't survive, and they'll lose. When the landlord gets back on track, he will be out of pocket, and then he's got to re-rent the place, and it's kind of like it's going to be a disaster in some areas for sure. But from the tenant's point of view, the tenants are governed by a lease. And most tenants don't read their lease, and most tenants need to have somebody read their lease for them because it may be a struggle because of the language leases are written in. But this is a good time to read your lease to see if there's any relief in your lease. There may be some leases that say, I know that there are leases, I saw one recently, where there was a pandemic clause in the lease. And of course, the landlord in that particular situation had put that clause in there, but didn't want anybody to bring it to their attention today. The tenant in question brought it to their attention and said, "Look, we got a pandemic clause. We're struggling. So because of that pandemic clause," and you could see it from the landlord's point of view, the reason there's a clause like that, if something happens outside of the landlord's control that affects the use of the building he's leasing to his tenant, he doesn't want the tenant to sue him, things outside of his control, right? That happened that stopped the tenant from doing his business. So the other side of the coin is when things outside of everybody's control stops the tenant from doing his business, the clause is there to protect both parties. But I think landlords and tenants both need to talk. This is not the time or place to be threatening, making threats, talking mean to people. This is not the time or place to do it. This is the time to try and put our heads together and figure out how we're going to make this work and how we're going to get through it. And we're not asking for them. I know that most tenants are not asking for the landlord to forgive their rent. They're asking for the landlord to work with them so the rent or a portion of the rent can be deferred until the tenant has their business back up and running. But we will see everything from no rent, deferred rent. We'll see everything across the gamut there. And we don't know when. You see, the thing that causes grief in this situation and stress, if a catastrophe happens, like 911, the building went down, we're being attacked, but it happened, and now we have to work our way out of it. This is completely different. Something has happened, but we don't know when it's going to end. Is it going to end in a week, in a month? We have people talking 6 months. We have people. I had a person on the phone today, one of our agents actually. He says, "Ray, I don't know what I'm going to do." He says, "Because I'm basically thinking I won't be able to sell anything between now and January." So it's going to affect everybody differently, and our sales are down by probably 30% or thereabouts. And you can well imagine that there will be opportunities, but they're going to come dressed up in problems.
I like that expression. I think even with the landlord-tenant relationships, you mentioned a few good points. I was wondering, maybe kind of tie it even more specific to people listening. Can you give like a good example of that you heard or experienced where a landlord and tenant have figured out a good way to move forward?
So one of the best landlords that I've talked with recently, he is totally on side with the tenant in the first month, so that would have been the month of April, not paying half their rent. Mm-hmm. And he'll collect that half. We'll figure it out. There's no discussion. We're not going to pay him, but we're not going to pay him. We're only going to pay half. They're only going to pay half this month. Now, then next month we'll talk about, is it half or is it 3/4 or is it a quarter? What is it? So the best scenarios where the landlord and tenant talk to each other and figure it out, because here's the fact of the matter. The fact of the matter is, before this happened, chances are the landlord, his payment to the bank was less than the rent. Why would he have a building where the payment's more than the rent and he's carrying the building? So that's a rare exception. The majority of landlords, their payment to the bank is less than the rents they collect. And now we have this situation where the banks understand that the landlord makes his payment from those rents, and they say, you know what, we're gonna work with you to reduce the payment and the balance, you know, make only an interest payment, and maybe your principal payment can be caught up later on in the future. So if you've got the banks working with the landlord works with the tenant, maybe the tenant stays in business and the landlord doesn't have to replace that tenant 2 or 3 or 4 months down the road. The last thing a landlord should be thinking is, or he should have it in the front of his head, I can't treat my tenant in such a way that the tenant goes out of business. I can't do that. I shouldn't want to do that.
Yeah. So that's great advice and practical stuff for people to consider when they're dealing with their tenant issue.
I mean, there's going to be some landlords who are well established. They're generous. You're going to see everything. So there's going to be, I know for a fact, there's some landlords that are going to be generous, and they're just going to tell their tenants, you know what can you pay me? Pay me that, and we'll call it good. You don't owe me anything in the future. There's everything from that to the landlord who's, if you don't get your rent paid, I'm going to change the locks on your door. But I can tell you this, if a landlord has that kind of aggressive attitude, it's not going to go well for him, because the press, the media would just love to hear that. Just recently in Surrey, a landlord had that strong arm kind of attitude. The press got a hold of him. I'm not sure if you guys saw this, and it was a week or two ago. And he's under a lot of pressure from the press because of the way he was trying to treat his tenant.
So the message that I'm getting here, Ray, is the commercial sector is quite different than the residential side in terms of the anticipation and the challenges and the issues that's going to be coming. And as you mentioned, there's going to be opportunities that comes with that. How bad do you think this thing's going to get in your personal professional opinion? I know we haven't seen anything like it. It's not like any other recession or any other sort of challenges that we've had in the past. So it's unprecedented times. What are you suggesting to your clients right now? So let's say, let's look at it from an investment point of view. If you have somebody that's been sitting on some cash that wanted to get into a commercial real estate deal, what are you suggesting to them? Well,
for people who are looking for an investment, we haven't seen anything break loose in the marketplace yet because it's still early. But I can tell you that having people at home for a month is tough. What's going to happen after 2 months or 3 months? Some people will say, enough is enough. I'm done. Let's sell this property. So you can't say that the reactions will be all over the map. They'll be completely different for some people than it will be for other people. But I can tell you that there will be people. I was talking to an owner of a business, a large manufacturing business today, and we were just getting ready to sell the business. We've been talking to him over the winter, and we're just getting ready to put it on the market. We signed the listing contract yesterday or today, I think. Can't remember, yesterday. And after we got the contract signed, he calls us up, had a little meeting with us, like on Zoom. And he said, we were in shock. He goes, I'm done. Well, what do you mean you're done? He said, I'm not opening that business again.
Wow.
That's come to him in the last 3 weeks. So, and he's not alone. And let me tell you, if you knew this guy, and I know this guy, but if you knew this guy, you'd go, no, he would never do that. He's a strong, strong guy. This is a very strong guy. Wow. And when I say strong, mentally strong. But this thing is stressing him out, and he's ready to shut. He's basically, I'm not going to open the doors again. You guys go ahead and sell the business, sell the land and buildings. I realize I realize I'm not going to get the same amount of money. He knows that. If you're not selling an operating business, you're just selling the equipment, the price just went down. And he realizes that. He's a smart guy. But the stress is too much.
And we know quite a few clients like that too, small business owners whose restaurants been shut down for the last month. And they're essentially kind of in a limbo. They don't know how long this thing's going to last. When it does open up, what's going to happen? Are they going to make up for all the lost times? What advice would you have to those people, to those business owners that might not be in that financial secure spot and they're really struggling right now? What advice would you have for them, Ray?
Well, if you are struggling and you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel and you haven't got any way of helping your situation, the sooner you make a decision to move ahead with a different plan, the better off you are. So you need to try and figure out what you need to do with people who you owe money to, suppliers or landlords, and have meetings with them to see what your options are. Because the longer you take to deal with these issues, the harder it will be and the more it might cost you. And here, the fact of the matter is, I mean, you've probably seen these guys being interviewed on the television that have huge overheads, like, $40,000 a month in rent and all that kind of stuff. And if you cut off their income, well, how many months can they go? And if they're already leveraged against maybe their own personal property in terms of mortgages, how much are people willing to let themselves go in the hole? So there will be everything from that to the people who may have to postpone their retirement a little bit because they're going to have to dig into their own pockets to keep the business going, but they have the confidence that it will recover. It all has to do with confidence, self-esteem, your own personal viewpoint of the world and how we're going to deal with it. We're going to come out of it. This isn't going to last forever. We're going to come out of it. There's probably been things that are worse for sure. We're going to come out of it. The only question is we don't know, and that's what's stressful to people. We don't know how long it's going to take.
There's certainly a lot of uncertainty.
So there isn't a one answer for everybody. Everybody's going to have a little bit different answer depending on their own personal situation and how they can cope.
Ray, we appreciate you being on here. I think you've answered most of the questions that everyday people want to kind of know. I would love to bring you again in the next week, depending on your schedule, and talking about mindset. I know you've been a huge mentor in my personal and in my business life. And during difficulties is when we got to turn within and then without, right? A lot of times when there's no control over the outside circumstances, we have to reevaluate ourselves. We have to reassess ourselves and re-examining ourselves. So I would love to bring you on and have a discussion there. We appreciate your time. And if Gennady and Manjit don't have any questions, we'll wrap this up.
Love to be on with your Ruse anytime, so just let me know. Same with you, Manjit, and Gennady. Love to chat. Just let me know when.
We appreciate you.
All right, Ray.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yep. Good day.
Bye-bye.